Hey there and welcome to Mewgenics. My name is Pete and today we complete a quick dive into one of the most anticipated and critically acclaimed video game titles of the year. Mewgenics is a roguelike that combines tactical turn-based combat with extensive cat breeding mechanics. There are character classes similar to Dungeons & Dragons and a plethora of passive and active abilities that offer incredible potential for synergy and fun combinations, both within the same cat as well as across your entire feline band of adventurers. Needless to say, mechanically the game has quite a bit to offer. I've been enjoying it tremendously these last few days, and I wanted to share. Although in my opinion Mewgenics is not without its flaws, I might be able to discuss a few of those as we progress through the video. Speaking of which, the goal here today is to simply show off the game's first level. We'll skip the intro tutorial and I'll explain everything as we go along. In true completionist fashion, that is what this channel is all about after all, I will mention any achievements as we unlock them. Generally speaking though, achievements in Mewgenics are perhaps a little disappointing, as the vast majority of the 281 achievements are rewards for story progression and unlocking classes and upgrades along the way. Very few of them focus on tackling a challenge in a particular way or pulling off a unique combination of moves or abilities. But that shouldn't take away from our enjoyment of this first level of the game's first act, and with that, let's jump right in. Now, as I've said earlier, I have skipped the short intro and tutorial. To start out, there isn't really much of a story, and we're also not taught much beyond the absolute basics of combat. I think I'll be able to cover those myself. No matter how we decide to start though, the game always begins with 2 cats in this house here, your base for the foreseeable future, and of course it can be upgraded in many ways that we might touch upon later. Let's cover a few basics to start here. Top right from left to right, that's food, cats and money. Food is required to keep our cats alive in the house. Each cat consumes 1 food per day. The number of cats includes only those inside the house. We can drag and drop them around freely, but cats left outside will eventually starve. And finally, currencies needed to purchase upgrades both during our adventures and outside of them. For now, let's bring our 2 feline friends inside. We have 1 male and 1 female here, Brody and Tiffy. Sadly, the game does not allow you to change cats' names. Not quite sure why, to be honest. Either way, it means we won't have any Patreon or channel supporter names for this one. Now, if we right-click a cat, we can see its stats, classic RPG attributes. Strength increases melee damage, dexterity increases ranged damage, constitution affects hit points and health regeneration, intelligence affects mana regeneration, needed for casting spells, speed is very important, affecting both movement range and turn order, so initiative, charisma affects how much mana you start with, so spellcasters want both high intelligence and high charisma, and finally there's luck, affecting crit chance and all randomness, of which the game has plenty, as you'll soon see. Very important to mention at this point, the 2 starter cats always have 1 stat maxed. The game doesn't tell you this, but 7 is the highest a stat can go as a baseline. This can be increased with classes, items or level ups, but for base stats 7 is the upper limit. This has direct implications on our cat breeding process, more on that in just a second. We also see our cat's abilities here. The first one is their base attack. The numbers below show damage and mana cost, which for the base attack is always 0. To the right of that we have spells, so abilities with a mana cost. At the very bottom we find a cat's passive abilities. For now just the 1, but you can gain more as you level up. Unfortunately, there is no need to familiarize ourselves too much with any of these, because our 2 cats right here have already completed the tutorial adventure, even if we skipped it, and are therefore now retired and cannot be sent out on future adventures. That way, the game forces you to always send out new cats, and one way of making them is by breeding, so let's end the day and see what happens. Alright, Brody and Tiffy have made a kitten. Whenever this happens, the offspring will inherit not only the visual features of both parents, but also their stats. However, until we upgrade our house further, there is no guarantee it will inherit the higher value. This is determined by your house's stimulation rating, the second little icon, the yarn ball, currently at 1. Now, looking at young Kenzie here, we can see that she did inherit her mother's 7 in Constitution. Sadly, she also inherited her mother's intelligence, so in terms of improving our gene line, we haven't really gained much. In fact, stats-wise, she is probably worse than both of her parents. She also inherited some of her parents' abilities, however, as a newborn kitten, she is not quite combat ready just yet. So we learn that kittens need to live through another night to age up and become capable adventurers. So let's put Kenzie back inside the house and take a look at the second source of cats, strays. Every day, stray cats like Stinkhorn here will arrive outside our house. It is up to us whether or not we want to take them in, but with a maximum score of 7 in Charisma, this one looks good, and it also has a potentially useful reviving ability. The quality of these cats, by the way, depends on your house's appeal, a statistic that we will likely not get into today. By the way, Stinkhorn here is what the game refers to as a ditto cat. It is neither male nor female and can actually breed with both genders. Let's see if anything like that happens as we now end another day and attempt to develop a capable band of adventurers. Unfortunately though, the night passes without anything of significance occurring. On the next morning then we can take note of the fact that our cats have left some poop behind, and you can also see it in the house stats on the top left here that this has a negative effect on some of them. So let's click it to destroy to get rid of those penalties. Young Kenzie meanwhile has aged up to become an adult cat. Nonetheless, there is still only 2 of them in our house that we could now send out. A full party consists of 4 cats, and early on that's what we should aim for. So let's take in our next stray here, P. In the beginning I feel like you really can't be choosy when it comes to stats, not to mention that this one isn't actually looking too bad. So let's add her to the house, which you may have noticed has just brought down another stat. Comfort, the one at the very top, just decreased from 3 to 2. Obviously, the more cats we cram into our small home, the more uncomfortable they will be. There will of course be ways to remedy that. For now though, they are not accessible to us, so we are left with no other choice but to end another day. Since a high comfort rating also encourages breeding, a low one does the opposite, and so on the next morning we can once again only take in another stray, Mewgenics, another genderless cat, and with it added to the household we now technically have 4 cats that we could send out on an adventure. Now, later on in the game there is an argument to be made for waiting a few more days between adventures and waiting to see if you can't breed anything good. As you can see, we still have plenty of food stockpiled. However, as I've said, as the number of cats in our house increases, the house's stats will decrease. This can quickly lead to fighting, injuries and even death, nothing that we want to see happen this early on, so let us take the 4 cats that are eligible and prepare them for their first big adventure. Before we send them out, each one of the cats here can be assigned a class. Obviously you don't have to do this, but especially early on it is highly recommended. Which class you choose depends mostly on 2 things, your cat's starting stats, and perhaps to a lesser extent at this point in the game, their already revealed abilities. For example, we can see that Kenzie here has great constitution and speed. This would make for an excellent tank. However, when picking classes, we don't always want to just boost strengths, we also want to cover our weaknesses. As you can see, making Kenzie a tank would leave her with tons of health, but with very little damage output. And ideally, regardless of class, we want to aim for at least 5 damage with the base attack. Higher is of course always great, but not at the cost of crippling other stats. In Kenzie's case, we'll actually make her our hunter, a ranged unit with a focus on hitting things from afar. Strength is not needed for this class, so we can easily sacrifice it. Speed of course also isn't great, but a 4 is still passable. Charisma also isn't great, but intelligence is decent. This should allow her some spellcasting. For the other classes then, Stinkhorn becomes our mage, a ranged spellcaster. They've got a great combo of high intelligence and charisma, and physical attributes don't matter too much for them. With intelligence 6, they regain 6 mana per turn. In the very early game that is pretty decent. Mewgenics then becomes our fighter, a frontline melee unit, and here I can also show you one of my biggest issues I currently have with the game, a lack of clear information. Let's take the Ned ability here for example, increasing our damage output and inflicting weakness on our enemies, but what's the range? I would assume it's melee, but it doesn't say. For the melee attack meanwhile, it clearly states adjacent unit, and Kenzie's spit attack here also clearly says infinite range. Then again, her lobbed shot does not state a range, so overall this is pretty inconsistent. And this is unfortunately not just an isolated thing, there are dozens of examples like these in the game, and you'll only find out what they actually do exactly once you start using them, or fail to, because you foolishly assumed they'd work differently. Now, let's not get bogged down by this and finish our squad selection with P, who becomes our tank with overall very well-rounded stats and the ability to boost her movement at the cost of 4 mana, exactly the amount she regenerates each turn. Now, you may have also noticed that all of the cats here have a yet-to-be-revealed second ability and passive. Those will be shown once we log in our selection, so let's do that now. Also, we literally don't have another choice. The only way to get back out of this menu is by exiting the game and reloading the save. So here we are then, let's take a look at the extra abilities our cats have received. Kenzie has marked, for 5 mana we can guarantee a critical hit, and with 5 intelligence she also gains 5 mana per turn, so we can do this every round. Her bullseye passive then ensures that her ranged attacks never miss, this is huge, and it also gives her a 25% bonus to crit chance. In combination with a marked, however, that's perhaps not quite so useful. Stinkhorn then gets Warp, a fairly cheap teleportation ability, very useful for a cat that we need to be a bit careful with. Stinkhorn's 16 hit points are not a lot. Lightning Aspect then is one of the weaker passives for the mage, I think. At the moment we have no way of dealing electric damage, and this early on we likely also won't meet enemies that do. Mewgenics then gets a fantastic damage boosting spell here, a bit expensive with 7 mana for 5 damage. Generally you want something closer to a 1-to-1 ratio, however this ability can deal damage in a circle, so it can potentially hit multiple enemies. The Patella Reflex counterattack then will likely not come into play much, dealing only 1 damage in return is often not worth it. Our tank P then starts with Throw Scrap, another ability where the description misses quite a bit of information. In this case, both the range and the fact that a scrap pickup spawned on another tile only grants +2 shield. Catapult then can be situationally very useful. It essentially allows cats positioned next to P to move twice per turn. I think we'll get to see how that works very soon, as we are now ready to depart. At the moment we do not have any items to equip our cats with, but that will soon change and potentially unlock a few more interesting synergies. So, our journey starts in the alley, where in true roguelike fashion we now move from a random encounter to random encounter. Completing one allows us to proceed towards the next. Occasionally there are branching paths, but they're not accessible this early on. The encounter types are broadly fixed. We have combat, skill challenges and loot, and we also have boss fights marked by a skull in a slightly darker color. In the top left we can find our inventory, nothing's in there for the moment. Food and coins we collect along the way will also be shown here, and in the top right we get information about the current weather. This can change during our adventure and potentially complicate things severely. However, for our first fight here the skies are clear. So let's begin our first round of grid and turn-based combat, and of course before we do anything hasty let's take a closer look at what we're dealing with. We've got 6 enemies here, 2 different types of cats, and also a bird that we'll discuss in a second. Hovering over a unit reveals more about them. We can see health, damage, movement range, luck, and any additional information that might be useful. For example, the kittens here will run away when damaged. Since they're melee enemies, this can be used to avoid them getting too close. The slightly bigger cats, meanwhile, have a ranged attack that potentially inflicts poison, and we also learn that they spawn maggots when they get damaged, so we want to take them down in as few hits as possible. Finally, there's the bird. This unit is neutral to all parties. Killing it grants stat increases and a bonus item, generally very recommended, but of course only if it's not too risky. Also on the battlefield here we have a coin and a mysterious crate. Destroying that crate could lead to more interesting loot, although of course once again eliminating all enemies is our top priority. To help us do that, the game offers a few handy bits of information. For example, right-clicking on a unit shows its movement and attack range. Movement is blue and attack is red, and this shows you exactly where you can position a unit so that it's safe on the enemy turn. Turn order can be seen on the top right of the screen, and it's based on a unit's speed stat. And of course, the range indicator works on our units too. Very useful since we can only ever see the abilities of the cat whose turn it is. Holding down the control key also gives us a simplified overview of the battlefield. This can be handy if the battlefield gets too crowded or to spot hard to see enemies or items, like this second coin in the back here that I previously missed. One final handy tip then, left-clicking on a tile around the cat will make it turn in that direction. This can be very important because attacks from the back deal 25% extra damage, so obviously we want to avoid having our backs turned to the enemies, and this is how you do it, another feature the game never really explains to you. Now then, let's get to it. Standing right next to our tank, we can now use P's catapult to fling Mewgenics across the battlefield. That way, we preserve our fighter's movement action and still get into attack range. Mewgenics' base melee attack here deals 6 damage, and that's 1 kitten down. The corpse, meanwhile, remains, and that's actually quite useful, as both our and the enemy's units cannot walk through those. Nonetheless, our fighter here is in threat range of 1 enemy, but they go at the far end of the initiative order, so for the moment we have nothing to fear as the enemy cats make their moves. As you can see, our enemies also have no qualms about destroying the bodies of their fallen comrades. In this case, that's actually quite handy because it clears a spot for our tank to move to, and since the tank's basic attack always deals knockback damage, the cat in the second row here also gets damaged, triggering a prompt retreat. Since we have mana to spend and will regain 4 on the next turn, let's also protect our fighter a bit more. I'm fairly optimistic though that we'll be able to finish this fight without taking any damage whatsoever. With our mage Stinkhorn then, we'll spend 4 mana to teleport diagonally. This gets us into range to take out another kitten with the magic dart basic attack. We even deal a critical hit here for double damage. This instantly destroys the corpse and it leaves behind a coin. This can sometimes happen, so destroying enemy bodies is usually a good idea if you have the time for it. Now at this point we need to pull back as Stinkhorn is in range of both enemies going next here. Moving next to our fighter should keep them safe though, and with that we can now finally bring it over to our hunter Kenzie to finish this first turn of combat. Now as you can see, Kenzie does have a shot against the cat right here, but we also know that a maggot will be spawned upon damaging it, and the 5 damage we'll be able to deal with her basic attack will not be enough to kill it outright. Now admittedly, with only 1 hit point and meager stats, a maggot is not a terrible threat. Nonetheless, it is 1 more enemy we need to eliminate to win this fight. Too many, and we might prolong it unnecessarily. At the end of the first round of combat here, then the bird also decides to flee. Unfortunate, yes, but I didn't want to put anyone into harm's way in order to kill it. On this very first run here, it's also perhaps not entirely necessary. Overall though, once again, if you get a chance to, then try to take them out. Now, to begin our second round of combat, we once again use catapults, this time to deal some damage. Landing directly on an enemy crushes them for 5 damage. That way Mewgenics can now kill 2 enemies in one go, and we're still not done yet. The movement action is still available, and so is the side slash action for 7 mana, allowing our fighter to deal damage to both the crate as well as to the last remaining enemy. On our tank's turn then, we destroy the body right in front of her, which now actually leaves us in a bit of a conundrum. There is a coin here that we could now grab with P's movement action. Unfortunately though, we can't split our movement, and Feather Feet also doesn't change anything about that, and we want to utilize the catapult again on the next turn with our mage, so let's move P in position and then end our turn. This now allows us to chuck Stinkhorn right on top of the last cat here, killing it, and we still have movement, basic attack and plenty of mana left to do more. With our basic attack then, let's remove the last 5 remaining hit points on the crate here. As you can see, this reveals a small pile of coins underneath, coins that we can now easily collect by teleporting with the warp ability, as the coin tile here is diagonally right next to the one that Stinkhorn is standing on. Quickly thinking about it though, I didn't see much of a benefit in doing that, so I ended up using Stinkhorn's regular movement after all. In hindsight, teleporting twice would have been the right move though, first to the tile with the coins and then back onto the one that we started on. Using our mage's movement last, we could have then collected 1 extra coin. But it is what it is, that extra coin won't make or break this run, and we can now also collect that very same coin with our hunter Kenzie, that is, after using her spit attack to kill the first maggot. So, sometimes it is worth overthinking your moves, sometimes it isn't. Either way, that is now the last enemy dealt with, and the first fight won in just 2 rounds. Now this actually matters quite a bit. The faster you finish fights, the better your rewards will be. In this case though, we don't earn anything special. Instead, we can now level up our tank P, and this is where the aforementioned lack of information about certain abilities becomes a slightly bigger problem. The goad ability here is a very good example, because it doesn't state anywhere just exactly how far enemies will be forced to move towards us. Now in this case it doesn't matter because it won't be the one that we pick anyway. For your first level up, I highly recommend something that increases your damage output per turn. Both Earthquake and Chew would do that. However, P only has an intelligence of 4, so Earthquake's mana cost is just a tad bit too high. We will be able to use Chew much more reliably, not to mention that it not only deals damage to an enemy but also heals our tank, therefore I think it is a great ability to have. Now let's proceed to our first random skill event, where we encounter a large ominous coffin. We get several options on how to deal with the situation. The cat that gets to try them is chosen randomly. This can lead to someone being very well suited for the task, or the exact opposite. Each skill option also has different possible outcomes, some good, some bad, and even the ignore option can sometimes have an effect beyond just avoiding the encounter. Now, our fighter here is definitely better at bashing than examining, but even a 6 in strength does not guarantee success. Case in point, an angry zombie stumbles out of the coffin. This does not lead to any stat penalties or injuries just yet, but it makes our next fight here a little bit more complicated, as that zombie is now added to our list of enemies. With its 15 hit points, it is also remarkably tough to take down for an early game unit, and considering its starting position so close to our cats, we definitely want to prioritize it. Another type of enemy introduced in this fight then is the little rat. This fight here has 4 of them, and while they can only move 1 tile per turn, afterwards they can dash the full length of the battlefield, which actually makes their starting position here rather inconvenient, as it will likely take them several turns to get to open ground. The pickups on this map then food and scrap. If everything goes smoothly though, they're probably not needed, as we now start things off with 2 attacks from our tank. Since this is a butt zombie, it exposes its behind once damaged, and well, we have learned that attacks from the back deal extra damage, so instead of 5, P's basic attack here now deals 7. It also pushes the zombie back 1 tile, effectively blocking the rats on the left side even further. Although the attack from our fighter here quickly removes the obstacle altogether, the zombie does not leave behind a corpse, and so the path for the rats on the left is technically clear. That means our tank will take some damage as we end our turn here, as both of the rats on the left have not yet acted. Then again, that is exactly what the tank is supposed to do. So we've taken our first 4 points of damage and our mage Stinkhorn is up next. Let's collect some coins and kill the rat that just moved in. In its current position here, it could cause some trouble. Better to remove it. We are then going to warp back, but just a single tile is enough, I think. We only need to get out of the threat range of the other rat on the left. The cat right in front of us here we can deal with before it gets to act. In fact, we can deal with it right here and now, as it's Kenzie's turn. As you can see, this time the rat on the left does not have a straight path towards our tank, so let's take out the kitten instead. One way or another though, I think we should be able to comfortably finish this fight on the next turn. Right, so here we are, 4 cats, 4 enemies remaining. Our tank P starts things off and makes it 3 on the enemy side. Then we use our fighter Mewgenics to eliminate the last remaining rat on the left. One of the 2 on the right is up next, but it won't be able to do much. With Stinkhorn we can now warp ourselves into attack range and take that rat out. Once again, if you play it smartly, most of the non-boss early fights should be doable in 2 rounds maximum. So, following this fight, our mage Stinkhorn is due a level up, and once more, when leveling up, we want to first of all prioritize synergy with existing, ideally damage-dealing abilities and passives. If that isn't possible, early on that's often the case, then we want to increase raw damage per turn, and if we don't get any options for that either, then we want to focus on mobility, although not so much in Stinkhorn's case here, as they already have the warp ability. So I think we'll go with Magnify here. For 5 mana we can increase the range and the area of effect of our basic attack. If we can then manage to hit at least 2 enemies with it, this effectively doubles our damage output. From the previous fight then, we also obtain a bag of meat. Meat is a pickup that restores lost health. This bag can be used to spawn some on an adjacent tile, and I think it makes sense for our tank, as P here is the most likely to lose health during any given fight. From the random loot encounter then, we obtain a rubber band, a very good early game pickup. This gives the cat who equips it +1 reach and is therefore perfectly suited for our fighter Mewgenics. As pure melee units, fighters often struggle to deal damage consistently early on. Increasing our reach therefore also increases our chances of getting into attack range. At the next random event then we are offered a deal, and I have to say it's not the most intriguing one. We neither want all cats to lose 10 hit points, nor do we want to sacrifice P, so let's just try to leave and see what that does. Now once again, no imminent penalty just yet, we are only told that we will regret this, hopefully not during this next fight, in which we will meet the first mini-boss of the level. Alright, and it is Lucy who the game picks for us, one of 4 possible mini-bosses that you can encounter at this point. Her physical resemblance to our mage Stinkhorn already reveals that she is a magic user too, and you can see it in the turn order in the top right, she will act twice this round. In addition, she sports a hefty 75 hit points, and she is perhaps the least straightforward of the 4 mini-bosses, as she has access to a variety of spells, all with different areas and effects. However, all of those spells take one of her turns to charge up, so we get to react and hopefully evade them as best as we can. Still, the fact that she goes twice per turn and our cats just once means that we will take some hits. Let us therefore now present her with a target who can take them. Also, here's a neat trick you can do with the tank's push attack. It can be used to move 1 tile if that's something you need. This allows us to grab the coin, then we throw some scrap onto this tile right here and move right onto it. This now makes P a little bit more protected. With our fighter Mewgenics, we then play things aggressively. Thanks to the rubber band we just equipped, our melee attack now covers 2 tiles, and so we can not only start dealing damage early, but also from behind, turning 6 damage into 8. Lucy then moves in and prepares for her Blizz attack. It doesn't take much to deduct that this could possibly be something ice-based. As a matter of fact, it is also always the first attack she uses, trying to hit as many of our cats as possible, which is actually why we created 2 pairs, if you will. Each pair including 1 cat that will go after Lucy, so that at most only one of our cats takes damage. With our mage Stinkhorn then, we are off to a great start with a critical hit from behind, dealing a whopping 14 points of damage instead of the usual 5. With Hunter Kenzie then, we can unfortunately not quite get into range no matter what we do, but let's move her in so that she stays between fighter and tank. That way we once again ensure that we have a way out for at least one of them. Lucy's Frosty Assault then freezes our tank and deals a minuscule amount of damage. 2 of the 3 points were thankfully blocked by the shield. Nonetheless, P was frozen for her turn, which is why she did not get to act and also why she's now wet. Now Lucy's attack also froze all of the grass patches in its area. Touching one of those now deals 1 point of damage, and she has also already set up her next attack, a flamethrower, and unfortunately neither of her 2 targets will be able to move before it hits. So, since her damage is partially unavoidable, we want to take Lucy down before she can do the same to us. We even accept taking some damage with our fighter here to get into a position to land 2 big blows from behind, including another critical hit, and with that Lucy's health is already down to only 30 hit points. Her flamethrower attack then hits, dealing 3 points of damage, but with varying results. Kenzie here was also set on fire and now has the burn status effect, taking 3 damage at the start of her turn, decreasing by 1 for each turn afterwards that this persists. Now, you may have noticed that our tank P did not suffer this status effect, and that's because she was under the wet condition when the attack hit. Yes, elemental damage does interact in this game and can actually be very important later on, allowing you to pull off some fun combos and dish out crippling status effects. For the time being though, we unfortunately don't have access to any of our own, so let's just keep doing damage the old-fashioned way. A warp gets Stinkhorn in position to deal extra backstab damage, and then we can also get the coin. Don't worry, Lucy's next attack is called Thunder and Stinkhorn is immune to lightning damage, so their health pool is safe for the time being. Sadly, the same is not true for Kenzie, who now loses a further 3 points of health, but we can get revenge pretty much immediately by moving behind our enemy once more, and we are now going to spend 5 mana to inflict Mark to guarantee a critical hit. Once again, this will benefit from the 25% backstab damage boost for a grand total of 14 points. So that leaves Lucy with only 9 health remaining, however it is now also the end of our turn. Her lightning attack then once again deals only 3 points of damage, so it's certainly not too difficult to endure this for a few rounds. Now, however, we find ourselves in a situation that you would normally want to avoid, as both targets of Lucy's next attack cannot move before she launches it, and we will also not be able to take her out in time. As you can see, P has no way of getting close to Lucy or her allies. The only thing we can do is boost her movement range by 1 and get close to Mewgenics, so that our fighter can now benefit from Catapult. Now, unfortunately, we land 1 tile short, but this goes to show just how crucial that rubber band pickup was, as we can now land a strike even from here. We also could have moved beforehand for another backstab, however, unless we had landed a critical, that would only deal 8 damage, and it would have put Mewgenics into the blast zone as well. That blast zone we now step out of and eat some food to heal up. And as Lucy then launches her attack, we see another elemental interaction. While our mage was frozen and had to skip the turn, Kenzie was not. That's because she was burning when the attack hit, the fire now extinguished, while at the same time preventing the freeze. At this point then, the kill is just a formality. We don't even need to move. And there we go, this time our fighter levels up. Personally, I don't find any of the abilities offered here all that great, but let's follow our priorities. There's nothing really here that creates or improves synergies, also nothing that really boosts Mewgenics' damage output, so let's pick something for movement. In this case, 1D chess, because it's cheaper than taunt, and actually also works somewhat well with Mewgenics' intelligence of only 3, as the extra movement granted by this ability scales with intelligence, albeit in reverse. Now, as another reward for winning this fight, we have received a spotted mushroom, granting its wielder +2 strength at the cost of -1 luck. This obviously belongs into the hands of one of our 2 melee-based characters, and since our fighter is the primary damage dealer of the 2, let's give it to Mewgenics. Their melee attack now deals 8 damage and the side slash 6. At the next random encounter then, P experiences existential dread. I believe this is the result of refusing to deal with the creature that we met at the last one. As far as I can tell, it does not have any negative effects on her stats though, so let's go ahead and jump right into the next fight. In this one, most of the enemies go first, but it should still be one of the easier ones, since we're not really dealing with anything too dangerous here. In total, we have 8 enemies against us, 4 are little rats that we already know from a previous fight. One of the new types we meet in this one is the Purrfect, a flying ranged attacker with fairly poor movement speed but pretty high damage output, and 6 hit points instead of the usual 5 that we've seen for the most part up until this point. Needless to say, these Purrfects here are our priority targets. We also have 2 flies, which are essentially the opposite of Purrfects, also flying but melee attackers, high movement, low damage and low health. Now on this first turn here, I think we'll stay fairly passive. We move our tank and our fighter into spots where they can't get hit. Nonetheless, our goal here is to finish this fight by the end of turn 2. Our hunter Kenzie then starts things off with one of the easiest targets imaginable, a fly, and an absolute waste of a critical hit. The real damage this turn then comes from our mage Stinkhorn, as we have several enemies clustered closely together. So first of all we warp for a bit of extra mobility, then we check where we can safely move, and this tile right here is perfect as we can now activate Stinkhorn's Magnify ability. This now turns the magic dart into a small area of effect attack, which allows our mage to kill 2 rats in one go. And so begins round 2, and of course we have been focusing exclusively on those enemies that could have become a problem at the beginning of this round. Any enemy that could have attacked us is now dead, and we should now hopefully have little trouble cleaning up the rest. Conveniently enough, our tank is up to exactly 9 points of mana, so not only can we activate Featherfeet now for 1 extra tile of movement to get us into position, from here a melee attack against the Purrfect then also gets us into melee range with the rat to the left, and with 5 points of mana left we have Chew still available to get us the kill. Up next then we move our fighter, grabbing some coins in the process and making use of our extended combat range, and with that we have everything set up perfectly for Kenzie. She has 8 points of mana left that allows her 2 casts of the Spit attack. Very fittingly, we also have 2 enemies here with only 1 hit point left. Now at this point we could of course finish the fight right here and now and have her take out the last rat with her lobbed shot. However, as long as we finish this fight before the end of turn 2, we'll get the same reward. So we end Kenzie's turn and have Stinkhorn here grab one more extra coin. Our mage can now get the kill, and with that we are once again done in just 2 turns. At this point then it is time for Kenzie's first level up. There are a few good options available here, including Twin Shot that would double her damage output at the cost of 9 mana. However, Marked essentially gets us the same thing for a much lower mana cost. Picking both of them would also be overkill, so let's go with Terrain Walk, a somewhat restricted teleportation ability but still much more freedom of movement. Kenzie is then also the cat to perform our next random skill check here. She's got 6s in both luck and constitution, but let's try taking the can. And that is successful, as we now receive an energy drink. This is a consumable item granting 1 extra point of dexterity and speed, and it would actually suit our hunter here quite well. However, since we only have 1 more fight coming up that we won't really need it for, let's save it and bring it back home for the next adventuring party. From the random loot encounter then, we recover some breakfast. This can be equipped to grant its wielder +2 health regeneration. Once again though, we'll save it, as I think we can actually beat this last fight without taking any damage whatsoever. Finally then, our last encounter before the final boss is a shop. 3 items are for sale, and with our 24 coins we could purchase at least 2 of them. If this were a run that continued past this level, then I think I would pick the rare candy here for an immediate level up of one of our cats, a nice boost to our combat abilities and noticeable in the long run. However, since this run will end after the next fight, it's not needed, and neither are the 2 pieces of headgear on offer here. Like I said, I'm fairly confident that we will be able to beat the final boss of this level without taking any damage, so we don't need to spend money on anything that protects us. Again, different story if the run were to continue after this, but on this first one the game does not let you do that, and so I think we are now left with nothing else to do but to meet the final boss of the alley. Alright, meet Radical Rat, our final foe for today's video. Accompanied by a song that is incredibly difficult to get out of your head once it's stuck in there, Radical Rat is a rather unique enemy, sporting 67 hit points and, according to the stats here, dealing no damage whatsoever. That is because Radical Rat throws bombs that explode at the end of the round. Those are the true damage dealers, and they are quite potent. They are also not too difficult to defuse as long as we ensure that they get thrown in our vicinity. If possible, Radical Rat will always try to hit at least 2 of our cats. This can be used to kind of influence where the bombs land. Now, very important, these bombs only have 1 hit point, and if we tag them, they get disarmed. And despite the fact that Radical Rat gets to act 3 times per turn, we do not need to disarm the bomb until the very end of the round. So with our fighter Mewgenics here, let's focus on dealing some damage instead. 1d chess gets us moving a few tiles, but those few tiles are enough. With the regular movement action, we can now get in position for catapult, and with that into range for an attack. At this point then, with our mage Stinkhorn, we want to start disarming the bomb. Radical Rat will get to act twice more before the end of the round, and we cannot leave it all up to our hunter. And this is essentially the core mechanic of this fight. Radical Rat throws bombs and you disarm them, while at the same time you also try to deal enough damage to take the enemy down. Taking damage in this fight really only becomes a risk if you don't have enough range or mobility, or if fire comes into play, as that will make the bombs explode instantly. With Kenzie now disarming the last bomb here, we have officially survived the first turn, and we have tactically moved right next to our tank, so we can use another catapult that now allows us to deal a little bit of extra damage. At the end of the round then, with the last action, Radical Rat turtles, protecting itself from any exploding bombs and pushing adjacent units back 1 tile. Despite all that, in theory, you could of course also try to use the bombs against Radical Rat, for example by pushing it into their blast radius. You would then also need to manually explode the bomb before Radical Rat turtles, for example with fire damage. In my experience, all of that requires so much setup that it's usually not worth it for just 10 damage. Since there will be at most 2 bombs per round, you should have plenty of actions left to deal damage the old-fashioned way. Still, you can see it here with Mewgenics, melee characters are at a bit of a disadvantage in this fight. In this case, our fighter was really left with no other choice but to defuse the bomb. which feels somewhat wasteful for the wielder of the most powerful basic attack in our team. Our mage Stinkhorn, however, can make up for that though, not only with 5 damage from the basic attack, but also with 5 more from catapults, a skill that I think I underestimated at the beginning of the video. If you take just a little bit of time to plan your moves around this ability, it can be surprisingly effective. Hunter Kenzie's next turn here is another testament to that. First of all, we want to take note of the fact that she has maxed out her mana at 9, so we can afford to spend 4 points on a low damage spit attack, still enough to take the bomb out. Then we can move next to our tank and use catapult for a little bit of extra movement range. This then leaves us with 5 points to spend on marked to guarantee a critical hit on our next attack, so our lobbed shot now deals 10 instead of 5 points of damage. Now unfortunately, the marked condition only persists until the end of the round. This, in combination with Kenzie's low speed, which places her last in the initiative, is of course not ideal. As it stands, she is the only one who can actually benefit from marked. Having her go earlier would allow other cats to land critical hits as well. Nonetheless, it is only turn 3 and Radical Rat is already looking battered. Once again, we will now use 1D chess to move 2 tiles with Mewgenics. This conveniently places our fighter right next to our tank, and this time we use catapult to take out the bomb. Now unfortunately, this lands us right next to our tank P a second time, and it appears we can't use catapult twice per turn, while at the same time we also can't use our movement action as long as we are in range of catapult. That's perhaps a mechanic that could use a slight overhaul. In any case, another casting of 1D chess gets us away and into range to deal more damage. Since there are no active bombs on the battlefield at the moment, Stinkhorn will of course also go for the hit. The magic dart is perhaps a little bit more finicky than the hunter's lobbed shot, as it requires line of sight and cannot go over obstacles. Now at this point then, Radical Rat places 1 more bomb but also only has 8 more hit points left. And that means we don't even need to deal with that bomb. However, we're going to do so anyway. This is a completionist channel after all. From behind then, we can once again inflict Mark for a backstabbing critical hit for 14 points of damage, and that's the alley's final boss dealt with in just 3 turns. As the first cat in our party, Stinkhorn now advances to level 3, and that unlocks a new passive ability. With the right spells and items, these can really open up new playstyles, and we are immediately seeing the potential for some interesting synergy here with Lightning Paws, as Stinkhorn's lightning aspect makes them gain charge whenever they deal electric damage, and charge means extra mana regeneration, even though that is once again not fully explained. We are also rewarded with a cardboard necklace, protective but fragile, flammable and brittle when wet, and considering that this is the end of our journey for today, not worth equipping on anyone. Now, as we progress further, we will unlock places to go from here, new levels with new and more powerful enemies. For the first run, however, the only place left for us to go at this point is back home. And so here we are, all the food and coins that we collected during this adventure is now added to our funds and stockpile, and as a reward for completing the alley for the first time, we have now unlocked the sewers level. Getting to the sewers, however, will require another run through the alley, a run for which we would need 4 new adventuring cats, as Kenzie, Stinkhorn, Mewgenics and P are now officially retired. Now at this point, perhaps a brief look at how the game would continue from here. Plenty of things will unlock as you progress, most importantly perhaps new classes. Hunter, Fighter, Mage and Tank are only 4 of a grand total of 13 classes the game eventually has to offer. House expansion is also a big one. New rooms and furniture will help you breed and attract better cats. You can also find ways to gather more information about your cats. This too helps with breeding the right pairs. And of course, there is plenty more adventure to be had too. The alley is just the first level of 6 in the game's first act, and there are 2 more acts, both with 6 more levels each, and exploring all of the enemies and secrets that all of those levels have to offer, that will keep you occupied for quite some time. So, long story short, this is a great and mechanically very deep game. I have been playing it every single day since it came out actually, but it does also have its flaws, at least in my opinion. I do love the class color system, and I love the sheer variety within each class. I love the insane synergy potential between the cats. I love the environmental interactions, and the soundtrack is fantastic, and I'm not even particularly bothered by the lack of a traditional story, if you will, at least early on. So yes, the game is great, but I also feel like it could be even better with just a few quality of life improvements. I've touched upon this at numerous points throughout the video, but there is a distinct lack of information and clarity about a decent number of attacks and abilities, which requires constant experimentation to figure out just how exactly things work. Pair that with being completely unable to reload in case you make a mistake, and I feel like this can lead to frustration, especially early in the game, and that's when you want to hook players in, not push them away. I don't believe it's a coincidence that mods giving the player more information, as well as mods that disable the strict anti-save scumming features, rank among the most endorsed on the game's Nexus page at the moment. Now, I'm not saying that these issues will ruin the fun for everyone, and yes, I know the argument, there are no real consequences to losing a run, you can always breed more cats and try again, and that's true, but a run that goes beyond just the first alley level that we covered here today can easily take up to 2 hours, and losing it because a mechanic wasn't clearly explained and didn't work the way you thought it would, that just feels bad. I do want to end on a high note though, because despite this lack of information, which I think is the game's biggest weakness at the moment, I have personally not yet seen a reason to stop playing the game, because I truly believe that there is something really special here. On the surface, the cat breeding mechanic may just look like a gimmick, but it adds so much depth to the game, and I cannot wait to explore what else Mewgenics has to offer in its later stages. For today though, we have sadly reached the end of what was always only going to be a one-off video. Maybe once my schedule clears up a bit, we may see more Mewgenics on Pete Complete. Until then, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can of course also go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or become a channel member or Patreon supporter. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!